the book of Daniel, chapter 3, and we begin reading from verse 8. Daniel 3, verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them to the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men, took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. The form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. The satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And may the Lord give us understanding in this portion of his word. So we come to this third chapter in this very interesting book and faith-building book as we look at the life of Daniel, and today looking at the life of this incident with his three friends. And my title is A Fiery Trial. Now this chapter goes alongside chapter 6, when Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. And just like chapter 2 actually goes with chapter 7, so chapter 3 goes with chapter 6. And of course, 3 and 6 is, as we've read, God intervening on behalf of individuals, displaying his mighty power. I'm going back to chapter 3, verse 1. I just shortened the reading because of time. But chapter 3, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, the province of Babylon. Now, a number of years have actually elapsed between chapter 2 and incidents of chapter 2 and chapter 3, verse 1. Some think 18 years, or this is rather the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So if we bear that in mind, then perhaps we can understand a little bit about what's happening here. Remember chapter 2, verse 47, which we looked at last week. The king said to Daniel, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets." He was taken up with the true God. And he seems to almost have changed. But he didn't become a worshipper of the true God. He just added the true God to his many other gods. But now, after 16 years, that sort of remembrance has gone from him. It's elapsed from him. Maybe it's at the back of his mind, but he's no longer thinking about it. The impression of it has worn off, has been lost. And after all these years, a little bit of a lesson for us, isn't it? If the Lord works in your heart to moves you, to stirs you, to turn to him, then we should turn to him in that time. Don't leave it, because impressions, even from the Lord, the Spirit, may wear off if we don't take heed to it. But we see that he was not converted. He just added this true God to his many other gods. He never got rid of his idols. So here in verse 1 we see him building this image of gold. And this is my first point, the golden image. And just like that image in his dream all those years ago, here he is building another huge, colossal image. And we read it's made of gold. 60 cubits is 90 feet high. And 6 cubits wide would be 9 feet. The breadth would be 9 feet. So a huge image. Now that image probably stood on a pedestal. So with the pedestal, the height probably includes the pedestal, but still nevertheless a tremendously tall and imposing image. And we read it was made of gold. Now it's unlikely that it would be pure gold all the way through, because that really would be a lot of gold. And Babylon had a lot of gold, but I don't think it was like that. Often, like previous times, they would make a mold of an image and they would gold plate the image. And that's probably what happened here, that the image is gold plated rather than pure gold all the way through. Now, one commentator has said something very interesting. Where did all this gold come from? Of course, Babylon was very rich. and it got gold from everywhere. But also, Nebuchadnezzar, during this time, those 16 years, he'd been back to Jerusalem at least twice. And he had ransacked the temple on the third time, taking all the silver and all the gold as well. And there was a lot of it. You remember from Solomon's time, there was a lot of gold in the temple. And so he brought all this back to Babylon. And one commentator says this is one of the reasons why these young men wouldn't bow down, because also to the image. Another reason, another factor, because of the gold that came from their beloved Jerusalem. Not the main reason, but it may well have been a factor in their minds as they thought about this image of gold. But this gold image was set up in a place called Dura, most likely in the southeast of Babylon. We're not exactly sure, but in a big area, a plain area where many crowds could gather for the dedication that was coming up. But why did he make it? Well, it could have been because he made it as an image to his Babylonian gods, to Bel especially, or it could be just an image to himself. Of course, if that dream is still vaguely even in his mind, he'll remember that he is that image of gold, that head of gold, rather, and that world kingdom is his. And it's almost as if he's setting up an image to represent himself and his world kingdom. But no doubt his gods also are included in this image. To bow down to Nebuchadnezzar is to bow down, in a sense, to his gods. And so he makes this image, and he wants everyone to gather for the dedication, we read in verse 2, of this image. And so he calls all his officials, the satraps, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and so on. All of them, they have to come and gather for the dedication. Now, that was very common. If you had an image, the heathen practice was first dedication before it's ever worshipped. And that's what's happening here. It's a very big occasion, and the word goes out not only to the city of Babylon, but to all the provinces. Everyone from all the different provinces, and Babylon, as you know, is huge, had to come to this dedication. So government work stopped for a long time, must be, during that time, because they all had to be there, including, most likely, the three men that we're reading about. They wouldn't have been excluded. They were in an official position, and they would be required also to attend this official dedication of this image. Now, all this, friends, takes time. It looks like it's happened overnight, but actually these things take time. When you think about it, to get the word out to all these people, to get them to come to Babylon, that's going to take time. And to build that huge image is also going to take a lot of time. They'll need, I don't know how long, a few months maybe, to get everything in order. But this time gap is going to work in the favor of the three Hebrew boys, because it's going to give them time to think, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this situation? Because they would be aware that this image is being built, and then they would be aware that they would be called on to bow down to it as an idol. And they knew that would be going against their principle, that would be going against the worship of the true God, who alone they worshipped. And so they came together, no doubt, and colluded together. How can we face the situation? What should be our response as the people of God when we are going to be called to this ceremony? And it seems like they were decided to not to bow down to the image if that was what is required, but to stand upright, stand straight for the Lord, and to show that they would not compromise their faith, come what may. Come what may. But before we go on, we probably have to ask, why isn't Daniel here? Where is Daniel? Is not even mentioned in this chapter. He's the author of this book, but he doesn't talk about himself here. Well, some people say perhaps he is away from Babylon at this time, so he didn't, he wasn't required. But if the word has gone out to all the people in Babylon, the officials, you've got to come to Babylon, I'm sure he heard about it. Most likely he was actually still there in Babylon, not away on official business for the king. But there is in the text, it doesn't quite come out in English, but in the Greek it comes out that there's a difference here between the counselors mentioned in verse 2, who were called to attend, and the king's counselors, which we read about in verse 24 and again in verse 27. There's a different Greek word. They're the privy counselors, the ones who are very close to the king. So most likely those people were the one from whom, in a sense, the order came down. And in a sense, they may have been exempt from doing this thing which is required of the other officials. So that's why I think Daniel is not mentioned. Of course, he's there. He knows what's going on, and he's observing these things. And surely when he sees what the three Hebrew friends of his how they stood for the Lord, it would have been a great encouragement for him. When his turn came many years later, and he would be cast into the lion's den, surely he would remember this incident of the three friends who stood for the Lord, and he would be praying for them. He would have been involved in those discussions, no doubt, and he would have been praying for them. So he's not altogether out of the picture, even though he's in the background. Well, the great day comes for this image, the dedication, and we read, after it had been set up by Nebuchadnezzar, verse 4, a herald cried aloud, maybe more than one herald because a big number, and people from different languages cried out and commanded the people, whenever they hear those instruments playing, the horn, the flute, the harp, lyre, the psaltery, and all kinds of music, they were to fall down, they were to prostrate themselves before this image and worship it. And that threat comes in verse 6. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. In the twinkling of an eye, they will be cast. A threat to keep people from disobedience. And it came, verse 7, when people heard at that dedication service the music playing and the instruments, that they all the people, nations and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, all except the three who stood up. And would have been obvious that maybe at this time King Nebuchadnezzar didn't see it. A burning fiery furnace. That was a common Chaldean form of punishment, so terrible. A huge furnace which people were cast into. And the command goes out, the punishment is mentioned, but these three still stand firm for the Lord. Well, dear friends, in application, just in this point, we have to say that certainly often we see laws being introduced by governments which go against our faith, which go against our Christian morals. Especially today, the Christian morals is being under attack by none other than the government itself. And we must be aware of these things which are happening and know how to take our stand. And there's often a threat of punishment if we don't comply. If we don't follow the rules, they threaten to punish you, just like in Revelation 13:15. If you don't worship the image, be killed. And this is something that's happening in our day, where laws are being brought in on gender and same-sex attraction and LGBT, and they're being imposed not only on our children, but even on the church. And churches are being almost forced to, and it's heading that way, to welcome and accept LGBT people just as they are, and not say it's wrong for what they stand. There's recently in the UK, there's a very famous, but well-known evangelical leader, former evangelical leader, I should say, who used to hold the traditional view of marriage and the biblical view of sexuality, but now he has gone astray. Now he has gone away from that. And worse than that, he is now, as they usually do, turning against the church. Always happens. You go away from the truth, you become an enemy of the faith, enemy of the truth. And he's saying the church better be aware because there's psychological abuse. If people are coming to the church and they're expressing their concern about same-sex attraction and they want to get rid of it, they feel that they're fighting it, and he's saying if you pray for them or counsel them otherwise to overcome it, that equates to psychological abuse of those people. And he goes on to say, well, if the church continues to teach like this, it could lead to prosecution. You'll be prosecuted. And he's calling even on Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, to do certain things. He's warned about prosecution for churches who follow these things. And one person has said this is a campaign designed to intimidate and bully evangelicals into silence. And it's true. That's what's happening. The laws are coming in to try and against the Christian who holds the traditional view. You follow that view, you hold that view, you teach that view. Be careful. Persecution is coming, but also prosecution from the government. So we need as churches, isn't it, even to be on our guard against these things. Well, in verses 8 to 18, we see my second point, courage to stand firm. The Chaldeans who are against the Jews, don't like the Jews, are envious that they've come to power so quickly, so fast, and taken that position so close to the king that they had. They're out to get them, and out of envy, they accuse the Jews of not worshipping the image. Didn't you say? They're stoking up the fire in King Nebuchadnezzar. In verse 12, there are certain Jews, they say, whom you have set over the affairs of the province, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They're not listening to you. They don't care about you, what you say. They're personally affronting you. And on top of that, they don't worship or serve the gods that you have set up. They're disobeying your commandment. They think lightly of your commandment. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar takes the bait. And in verse 13, in rage, that is, in violent anger and fury, anger at being disobeyed, he gives the command for the 3 men to be brought before him. And we read that he gave them a second chance to really hear from their own mouth. Okay, really, will you, at the sound of the music, bow down before this golden idol or not? He says, if you do not worship, you'll be cast immediately to the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Just like Daniel was cast into the lion's den, they would be cast into this fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Well, he was a very powerful king. He was the number one king in the earth at that time. The superpower, the king of the superpower, world power at that time. And all this went to his head. It seemed he was indefeatable. And in verse 16 we read this wonderful response from the three men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." And what they're saying here is, there is no need for us to discuss this matter with you. There is no need for us to debate over the matter. We don't need more time to go back and think whether we should do this act or not. We have already come to a conclusion. We already know what we're going to do. We're not going to change our mind. Just like you are resolved to throw us into the fire if we don't obey and bow down to this image, so we are resolved we will not bow down to this image. Such courage from these young men. No need to discuss this matter. No need for a debate. The church also has to say this at times. When cardinal doctrines of our faith, the tenets of our faith on which the church is built and which has survived down through the generations, we cannot discuss it and modernize it and change it for our modern day society. Some people are trying to do that, but the doctrines of the faith are not up for amendment and change to bring it into line with today's society. There's no need for that. The Ten Commandments, moral law of God, is not up for debate. If people, of course, the application of it is, because modern day problems, modern day issues, which we need to address and speak about, and the application of those moral commands maybe needs to be explained. But the actual moral commands of God, those 10 summarized in the 10 commandments, they remain. They remain for all time. And they cannot be removed. Its validity is still there. Its relevance is still there. And it's something that is non-negotiable. And people are trying to change it still, even people within the church. For example, the Lord's Day. People don't want to recognize the Lord's Day as the Lord's Day. They want to change it to something else. They want freedom to do their own thing on the Lord's Day. They only want church for half a day, not the whole day. But the Lord's Day is, the whole day is for Him, which, that's what the Scriptures teach us. And but people want to change these things, or they want to change the Lord's Day to the Saturday. We know people are doing that. But it must be one day of the week set aside for Him, and usually where governments allow, it's usually where the days off are, it's Sunday. In some Muslim countries, it's a Friday. That's one day in the week. Anyway, this a wonderful answer goes on. If that is the case, verse 17, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to your king that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image you have set up. And again, they say these words, our God is able. King Nebuchadnezzar said, who is able to deliver you? And their response is, our God. No doubt very politely still. I don't think they said it arrogantly and in such a bold and impolite way. But they said it politely, our God is able, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. They probably had no idea how He would deliver them. I guess that the least thing that they thought was what actually happened. that they would actually be thrown in the fire, and the Lord would be in the fire with them, and they would come out without any burns. That probably never crossed their mind, but they believed that God would deliver them from the furnace. He would spare them maybe from being cast into the furnace. But verse 18, but even if not, if God doesn't choose to rescue them, still they will not bow down to this gold image. And again, we see what faith and courage we have to say these three have. And surely in their minds at this time was the writing of Isaiah. You just turn with me to Isaiah 43. And these wonderful promises and words of great encouragement to the saints all down through the years. Chapter 43, verse 1. But now thus says the Lord, who created you, O Jacob, and he who formed your Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. What a word that is. Perhaps quite likely that was on their mind. Or Psalm 66. Psalm 66 and verse 12. You have caused men to ride over our heads. Verse 12. We went through fire and through water, but you brought us out to rich fulfillment, to a place of wealth. Again, you brought us out through water, through floods, through flames. You brought us out into a better place. Can I just read to you a hymn I was just hoping we would sing tonight, but we didn't quite have it ready for our YouTube. But it's How Firm a Foundation, and it's number 274. But I'll read to you the words. When through the deep waters I call thee to go, the rivers of sorrow shall not overflow, for I will be with thee, thy trials to bless, and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. When through fiery trials thy pathway shall lie, my grace all sufficient shall be thy supply. The flame shall not hurt thee, I only design thy dross to consume and thy gold to refine. Such a wonderful, encouraging words, very relevant to what probably the hymn writer had this incident also in his mind. So dear friends, we must also, as the Lord's people, stand for him no matter what may happen to us personally. And we know, isn't it? We know people who have stood for the Lord. We know people who have been threatened to give up Christ. Give up Christ. The wife is told, if you just come to know the Lord, give up Christ, otherwise I'll divorce you, the husband says. Give up Christ, says the father to his son, otherwise I will cut you out of my will. Give up your Christianity. Give up your new faith. Give up Christ or we'll cut you out of the family. We know people, isn't it, who are who have had these things said to them, even in our midst. Now, it may not actually happen. These things, thankfully, the Lord intervenes and changes those family members or changes the circumstances so that things can continue in a way where the Christian can keep his faith and the family is preserved and no divorce or no cutting off from the family occurs. But there may be times when it does. And there are times when it does. We're not exempt from suffering. Even today's Christians are not exempt from suffering. And sometimes Christian women have to go through divorce because the husband no longer wants them because they have become Christian and they want to leave. Or the son is cut out of his will, or people do cut off your name from the family circle, so that you lose all contact with them. Oh, that's a very hard thing to take from people who you love so much, and people who you respect and want to be with so much, to be cut off. And yet, dear friends, we have to stand still for the Lord. We have to still show our allegiance is to Christ. We don't want those things to happen, but if the Lord permits them to happen to us for a reason, then we have to, in a sense, accept it. It happened to the Protestants of old time as well, during the Marian persecutions. And you remember how the Roman Catholic priests in England, and they would hold up the host to the Protestants and say, just say this is the body of Jesus Christ, the actual body of Jesus. And they refused to do that. And so they went to the flames. They were burnt in front of a big, huge crowd at the stake. They were put to death, but they went cheerfully. The Lord gave them strength. The Lord gave them help. No, I don't think that will happen to us here, so don't be scared. But what I'm saying is that we're not exempt from suffering. The Lord may allow us for a reason to go through it. Well, my final point, and really have to be very quick here, is verses 19 to 30. Christ with his people always. The king, full of fury, commands that the furnace is heated 7 times more, and that just means get it as hot as you can. Get the fire and the flames as hot as possible. And then in verse 20, he commands, everything has been done on the spot, immediately. He commands his valiant and soldiers, his army soldiers, throw these men, 3 men, into the fire. Verse 21, they bind them, their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments. They're cast into the midst of the fiery furnace. But we read verse 22, the fire killed those men. The flame of the fire killed those soldiers. It was so hot. It was burning hot. And the heat was just overwhelming, to the point where even these strong men were overcome and lost their lives. And verse 23, the 3 men are thrown, all bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Verse 24, the king is astonished. He rises up in haste and says to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? True, O king, they said. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. He saw them bound, but now he sees them loose. This was a huge furnace, not just a small oven, but a huge oven into which they were cast. And now that he sees them loose from their bonds, loose from those things that hinder them, and walking around, as if it's so cool and calm where they are, the environment that they're in. As if they've got nothing, no worry, it seems. They're walking and talking, no doubt, with that 4th person who is with them. And we read that they were not hurt, they felt no pain. No hurt came to them. And most of all, the form, he says, of the 4th is like the Son of God. Now, it's unlikely that he recognized or saw this person as Christ, the pre-incarnate Christ. We know it is, we believe it is ourselves, but we don't think he actually knew it. He actually refers to the same person as the angel, his angel in verse 28. So probably this is what he had in mind. But he saw this 4th person with them in the fire, in this fiery furnace. Did his face shine, like Revelation tells us, like the sun, or on its transfiguration? His countenance was like the sun. Is there something about him that really made him stand out? We don't know, but we know that the Lord Jesus himself in his pre-incarnate form comes to be with his dear people. Oh, dear friends, the Lord is with us in all our trials. We know he's with us at all times, but especially in the times of our trial, he draws nearer to us. And we have a sense and we have of his help and his presence with us, especially when we're going through fiery trials. We identify with him, we depend on him, he identifies with us. And in our trials, just like with these three, he comes to sympathize, to confirm that he is with us. And as somebody said, better to be with Christ in the fire than to be with King Nebuchadnezzar outside the fire, in the palace. And wherever Christ is, that's the place for us to be. But here we see how the Lord comes to comfort, to encourage, to strengthen his people as they pass through this fiery trial. And we know, isn't it, when we think about trials, trials are very grievous. Trials can be very painful. Otherwise, it's not really a trial. If it's not, the trials that we're going through are not easy, but they are designed for our good, the Bible teaches us. They're designed for our benefit. God doesn't send them to us to hurt us, to spoil us, but to purify us, maybe to wean us from the world, maybe to wean us from ourselves, maybe to develop our graces in some way or other, but never to hurt you. He never designs trials for your hurt and for your damage, but to remove the dross of sin and the world from us. All of them are sent in love from our Father above. And then, of course, we get in trials, you actually get to know the Lord better. We pray, Lord, I want to know you better. And sometimes he sends us a trial to bring us closer to him. And we get to know him so much better. John Bunyan got to know him better in prison. Samuel Rutherford also got to know him better in prison, a Scottish divine. Anyway, we move on. Nebuchadnezzar calls them out, and they come out at his bidding, and they look and they observe them. Not even their bodies are not burnt. Even the hair of the head is not singed, not even burnt slightly, and there's no smell of the fire upon them. Wonderful thing. When you compare it, what happened to the soldiers, no harm happened at all to God's people. He is so powerful. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is amazed. He blesses their God, and he says as well, down in verse 29, he makes this decree that whoever speaks anything amiss, anything derogatory, anything offensive against this God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and so on, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. And the king promotes these three, much to the chagrin of the Chaldeans, wise men, who were hoping to demote them. They are now elevated. What can man do? And he fights against God. He's always on the losing side. No matter how weak we are, we are weak in ourselves, but God is not weak, and he changes situations, and kings' hearts are in his hand. He turns them whithersoever he will. He protects his people. Surely, and you can read this in your own time, Peter had this incident in mind when he wrote about the fiery trial which was to try us in 1 Peter chapter 4. And I will leave that to you to read in your own time. Well, let's close in prayer.